Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Most people think they know, but most people are actually wrong. We use these words to explain why we feel drained after social situations, why we prefer silence over stimulation, or why some people seem to come alive in groups while others come alive alone. But somewhere along the way, introversion and extroversion became labels instead of explanations. And in doing so, we started misunderstanding what personality really is. So today, I want to clarify something fundamental. Introversion and extroversion are not about how social you are, and they are not personality types in the way we casually use the word. They are about how your nervous system relates to energy, and this matters across cultures, including in South Asia. Someone will say, for example, I'm an introvert because I dislike people, or I'm an extrovert because I get bored alone. But introversion and extroversion were never meant to describe how much you like people. They were never meant to describe social skill or confidence or charm. And they definitely were never meant to explain why someone is too quiet or too loud. They describe ways in which human beings manage their energy, stimulation, and contact with the world. And the reason this matters so much is because many people spend their entire lives trying to correct something in them that was never broken in the first place. Seeing how this is not about personality, we need to start by looking at very common misconceptions. Introverts are often misunderstood as shy, being distant or withdrawn, whereas extroverts are often misunderstood as superficial, loud, or attention-seeking. But both interpretations miss the point entirely. Introversion and extroversion are not about personality style. They're about where you recharge. So let's clarify what we actually mean by personality. When we talk about personality style or personality type, we're usually referring to traits and characteristics, such as how expressive you are as an individual, how cautious or bold you tend to be, how emotionally intense, organized, flexible, sensitive, or assertive you are. These are patterns of behavior and temperament. They describe how you move through the world, whereas extroversion and introversion don't describe how you behave. They describe how you recover. They're not about whether you're warm or reserved, whether you're confident or hesitant, articulate or quiet. You can be an introvert with a very strong presence, and you can be an extrovert who is very thoughtful, measured, and emotionally deep. Personality traits tell us what you're like, but introversion and extroversion tell us what restores you. That distinction matters because someone can have an outgoing personality style and still be introverted in terms of energy. They may speak very easily, lead meetings, enjoy connection, and then need long periods of solitude to recalibrate. And someone can have a calm, understated personality style and still be extroverted in terms of energy. They may not dominate conversations, but they may feel more alive, focused, and grounded through interactions with others. When we confuse personality traits with energy orientation, people end up mislabeling themselves and then building lives that quietly exhaust them. An introvert doesn't lose energy because of people. They lose energy because of too much stimulation. That stimulation can come from noise, from constant conversations, from having to respond, react, engage, perform, or just stay mentally on. Even positive stimulation can be exhausting if it's continuous. Whereas an extrovert doesn't need people because they are empty inside or something. They need interaction because it activates them. Engagement helps regulate their inner world. So being in contact helps organize their thoughts and emotions. And once you understand that, so many lifelong confusions begin to make so much sense, such as why someone can love people deeply and still need long periods of solitude, and why someone can enjoy being alone but start to feel dull, restless, or invisible without interaction. From a personality science perspective, This distinction is not a Western invention. Large cross-cultural studies on personality show that core traits, including extroversion and introversion, appear across cultures, including Asian and South Asian populations. What changes is how these traits are expressed and valued, not whether they exist or not. Personality traits are universal. Expression, on the other hand, is cultural. So, personality psychologists widely agree that basic personality dimensions are universal, meaning they appear wherever humans live. What isn't universal is how culture responds to them. For instance, in many South Asian countries, values such as relational harmony, respect, emotional restraint, and attentiveness to others are emphasized. These values can overlap with what Western psychology might label as introverted traits, such as listening more than speaking, reflecting before responding, or avoiding unnecessary attention. This doesn't mean South Asian cultures are more introverted. It means different behaviors are rewarded. For example, research conducted in South Asian contexts, including studies with Indian student populations, show that introversion and extroversion relate to real differences in communication styles, learning preferences, and social engagement. And they are not deficits or advantages, but differences. For instance, extroverted individuals may thrive in interactive, discussion-based environments, while introverted individuals often excel in listening, reflection, and focused work. Both styles function within South Asian societies, but they are interpreted through cultural lenses. A lot of people start blaming themselves or each other based on their misinterpretation or lack of understanding of what it means to be introverted and extroverted. Think of an introvert after a long day of meetings, conversations, noise, and expectations. Even if the conversations were meaningful, and even if the people are loved, and even if nothing bad happened, by the end of the day, there's often a quiet internal depletion. It's not sadness, it's not anger, it's just fatigue taking over. And this is a kind of mental saturation. So they retreat, they go quiet, and they want space. What they are often seeking is not distance from people, but distance from stimulation, so that they have time for their nervous system to settle and for their thoughts to slow down, and for their inner world to reorganize. And this is where misunderstandings begin, because for the outside world, that retreat often looks like rejection. Now think of an extrovert in prolonged isolation, not a day or two that can be pleasant for anyone, but weeks of low stimulation, minimal interaction, and repetitive routine. What starts to appear is dullness and restlessness. It's a sense of shrinking. Extroverts don't come alive because they are shallow. They come alive because interaction organizes their inner world. So conversations helps them think, engagement helps them feel real, and feedback from others that helps them locate themselves emotionally. Neither of these is better. But again, culturally, we've made them very unequal. The deepest wounds around introversion and extroversion usually don't start in adulthood. They start early in families, in classrooms, and social systems that tend to reward one style over another. So in many societies, especially modern productivity-driven ones, extroversion is rewarded. That's like being quick to speak, comfortable performing, able to self-promote, to be visible, whereas introverts are usually told things like, you need to speak up. You need to participate more. You need to be more confident, as if quiet observation is a flaw rather than a form of intelligence. At the same time, extroverts are often shamed in quieter cultures or family systems. They are told, tone it down, you're too much, you talk too much, you're exhausting, as if aliveness itself were inappropriate. So both types learn very early on to doubt themselves. And this is crucial, because most of the psychological pain around introversion and extroversion does not come from the trait itself. It comes from being misunderstood while growing up, and from being mirrored inaccurately, from also being subtly taught that your natural way of engaging with the world is inconvenient, is excessive, or insufficient. This misunderstanding doesn't stay internal. It shows up very painfully in relationships as well. If you were an introverted child who was constantly pushed to perform, you might end up growing feeling very anxious, self-critical, and chronically overstimulated. You may learn that you need to override your own limits, to ignore early signs of exhaustion, and to associate closeness with depletion. On the other hand, if you were an extroverted child who was constantly silenced, you might grow up feeling unseen, excessive, or ashamed of your presence. You may learn to suppress expression, to minimize your needs, or to seek validation indirectly rather than openly. Later in life, these wounds often masquerade as personality problems, and you tell yourself things like, I'm very bad with people, or I'm too needy, or I'm very emotionally unavailable, or I'm so overwhelming. But in reality, what's happening is just a mismatch between how someone is wired and what they were allowed to be. What about couples? Some people believe that an introvert-extrovert couple cannot work, but these couples are actually very common and often deeply drawn to each other because one brings depth and reflection and containment, and the other can bring movement, connection, and expansion. But without awareness, this difference quickly can turn into conflict. Most couples think that they're fighting sometimes about closeness or distance, but they might not be. The introvert in the couple may feel sometimes invaded, pressured, or emotionally crowded, especially if space has been repeatedly misunderstood as rejection, whereas the extrovert may feel ignored, unwanted, or abandoned if connection has been repeatedly postponed or minimized. So both people start to personalize what was never personal. The extrovert will think to themselves, he needs space, so I must not matter, whereas the introvert will be thinking, she wants to talk, so my boundaries don't count. But the issue is not love in this case. It's energy regulation. And this is why understanding your orientation, whether you're extroverted or introverted or somewhere in between, is not about identity pride. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing how you recover from stress and what environments drain you. It's about knowing what kinds of closeness nourish you rather than exhaust you. There's another layer that's rarely talked about as well. Many people don't actually know whether they're introverted or extroverted because they might have experienced trauma, anxiety, or depression, and that can distort this expression. Someone may appear introverted because they've learned it's safer to withdraw, and someone may appear extroverted because silence feels unbearable. So the question is not the label, the question is, when I am well, when I am rested and safe, what do I naturally move towards? What feels regulating rather than defensive? What feels nourishing rather than compulsory? Here's the part most people never hear. You don't need to become more extroverted to be successful, and you do not need to be more introverted to be deep. You need to become more accurate about yourself. One of the quiet tragedies I see in a lot of adults is how many of them are living against their own nervous system. Introverts are scheduling non-stop social commitments and wondering why they end up feeling so numb, whereas extroverts are working maybe alone in silence and wondering why they are feeling so empty. So people end up often blaming motivation or discipline or think it's a personality flaw, when the real issue is simply misalignment. Introversion and extroversion are not instructions about who you should be. They are information, and this information tells you how you engage with the world. And it's information about how you also protect your energy. It's information about how you stay psychologically alive. When you learn how to listen to that information, really listen instead of fighting it, then something starts to change inside of you. You stop trying to correct yourself and forcing yourself into shapes that don't fit. And you stop apologizing for how you naturally recover or retreat or engage or connect with others. You don't become louder, you don't become quieter or different. You just become more at home with yourself. And sometimes only that can change everything.